Hello, my name is Caleb Benedict, and I'm here today to talk about. Hello, my name is Caleb Benedict, and I'm here today to talk about gentrification and why gentrification is an ethical issue. Hello, my name is Caleb Benedict, and I'm here to talk today about gentrification, what gentrification is, what it looks like, its history, and then some ethical issues that were faced when dealing with changing cities. And on top of that, we're going to talk about what can municipalities and other forms of local government, in addition to individuals, do to help mitigate negative side effects that gentrification can impose onto a community. What is gentrification? I'll give us a couple definitions. Gentrification is the process of renewal and rebuilding accompanying the influx of middle class or affluent people into deteriorating areas that often displace poorer residents. So essentially, a shift in some elements of the population that causes some type of disruption, oftentimes displacing poorer residents. This is a definition by Peter Marcuse, who wrote an article in 1985, in the Journal of Urban and Contemporary Law, and he writes, gentrification occurs when new residents, who disproportionately are young, white, professional, technical, and managerial workers with higher educations and income levels, replace older residents who disproportionately are low income, working class, and poor, minority and ethnic group members, and elderly from older and previously deteriorated inner city housing in a spatially concentrated manner. And what's the history of gentrification? A lot of us have heard the term gentrification, but not many of us really know what went into gentrification and why it became such a bad thing. But essentially, for the United States in the past 70 years, 4 things occurred over that time frame that led to gentrification. Those are white flight or abandonment, which is essentially large groups of middle class families and individuals leaving the inner cities after World War II and relocating into the suburbs. Because of this, many of the jobs followed. Redlining. Redlining was an unethical lending practice that happened by banks, insurers, and other financial institutions that specifically prevented home mortgage lending to minority groups and low-income individuals in certain geographic areas that were literally outlined in red ink on maps of communities. Urbanization. Urbanization took place in varying time frames after, but it took place after abandonment occurred and redlining. And urbanization is essentially the reversal of the abandonment of the inner cities. Urbanization is the process where large numbers of people relocate to the inner cities for reasons such as being proximate to employment opportunities and other reasons wanting to live in the inner cities. There are many attractions that cities can offer, and it was a change in mindset as well. And then displacement. Urbanization occurred and oftentimes led to the displacement of individuals who remained living in the inner city communities after abandonment occurred. So let's talk a little bit more about abandonment and white flight. Abandonment and gentrification both are reflections of a single long-term process resulting from the changing economy of the central city. Peter Marcuse in that same article stated that. And then white flight, according to the dictionary Merriam-Webster, is the departure of whites from places such as urban neighborhoods or schools, increasingly or predominantly populated by minorities. An unfortunate thing that happened as a result of abandonment, where cities essentially were left with lower taxable properties and an emptying out of the middle class. And those who remained remained in these underfunded cities that oftentimes public services were lacking in. Redlining. Redlining was usually unlawful discriminatory banking practices whereby those living in or doing business in certain poor neighborhoods are either denied credit or have to pay higher than normal rates. Now, this definition came from the Business Dictionary, and this is an unethical practice. Everyone knows that now. There's even a federal act that prevents redlining from happening. But it truly was discrimination based on income and, even worse, oftentimes minority status. And then urbanization. We probably all know what urbanization is, but here's a definition from Merriam-Webster again. Urbanization is the process by which towns and cities are formed and become larger as more and more people begin living and working in central areas. It's a movement back into the cities. It's as simple as that. And then displacement. Displacement is, according to Peter Marcuse and his research, a result of each of these developments. The poor are displaced. They are displaced when businesses desire to move in because land is too valuable to house them further. They are displaced when gentrification takes place because the buildings and the neighborhoods are too expensive for them. They are displaced when abandonment takes place because the buildings and the neighborhoods are unsuitable to provide decent housing for them. This is his definition of displacement, and it's essentially summarizing the negative side effects gentrification often has, which is, just like we just read about, the displacement of individuals who didn't want to leave there. That wasn't a part of their plan. But the market forces did their thing and essentially, oftentimes, priced out individuals who could no longer afford to live in those areas. It's very unfortunate. There's also the unethical side of displacement, which is essentially forced evictions, no-cost evictions, people being targeted and motivated to relocate so that property owners, property managers, and developers can get more profit, more revenue, more income from certain properties. Here's an excerpt from Emily Ponder, who wrote an article in the Southwest Journal for International Law. Many landlords in gentrifying neighborhoods have a strong financial motivation to deregulate stabilized apartments to increase rent, or may seek to remove undesirable tenants so that wealthy white families will feel comfortable moving in. Thus, they resort to harassment and baseless evictions, directed primarily at tenants of color. These acts clearly conflict with the guarantee of legal security of tenure and violate the right to adequate housing. So this excerpt is exactly what I mean when I say that there are unethical side effects of gentrification. These are landlords trying to find ways to evict their tenants or motivate them to move out, specifically because they are in the way of extra money, extra revenue, extra income. Targeting based off of minority status is unethical. Here are some other examples of side effects of gentrification. Rent increases. This is sometimes great if you're a landlord, but it's oftentimes unfortunate if you're a renter and you just can't afford these steep increases in rent. Property value increases. Again, it could benefit individuals greatly. It's benefited many people I know. I live in Portland, Oregon, and Portland has rapidly gentrified over the past couple decades. Income decreases. Sometimes the result of urbanization forces out certain industries because they can't afford certain types of land because developers are choosing to develop properties into high-rise residential units, other type of multi-use facilities, and less on the manufacturing scale. All of these can lead to some type of displacement. Here's an example from Enterprise Community using Census Bureau data on how in the past 13 years, or this time frame from 2001 through the end of 2013, there's been a significant increase and consistent increase in renter housing costs, while at the same time overall renter income has decreased. These two factors make people more vulnerable to displacement. Again, same source, Census Bureau data. This is showing the overall cost of burden for renting households since 1960s, and it also shows that it's, for the most part, steadily increasing. Ethics, this is what it's all about. There are true ethical dimensions to this concept of gentrification. Redlining, like I talked about, that is a very unethical practice of targeting, oftentimes minorities specifically, and low-income minorities who live in certain neighborhoods by preventing them from being financed to purchase a home within those specific neighborhoods outlined in red. That was targeting, and it's no longer allowed by federal law. And then tenant neglect. Now this term essentially means any type of actions or behavior that's unfair, is outside the scope of a lease agreement, and it's essentially trying to entice a tenant from moving out so that they can make way for the property owner to make higher incomes, higher revenues, or turn a profit faster on that property. Now let me read this excerpt again from Emily Ponder, who wrote in the Southwestern Journal of International Law a brief statement about gentrification in New York City. It is a pattern seen over and over again in my work as a tenants attorney in New York City. When landlords and developers are positioned to earn far more from gentrifiers than long-standing low-income tenants, they often resort to extreme measures to force those tenants out. Landlords neglect to make repairs, they cut off access to heat and electricity, and allow perpetual rat and bedbug infestations. They make persistent buyout offers, which to a low-income family may seem substantial, but in reality will not go nearly far enough in cities where the affordable housing continues to shrink. They make improvements in an attempt to legally justify charging higher rents in stabilized units, making a previously affordable unit out of reach for long-time tenants. This is an example of going too far and being unethical in that relationship between a tenant and a property manager. So here are some mitigation techniques. The markets will do their work, supply and demand changes over time, and right now, living in the inner cities is a very high demand status right now compared to, say, the 1960s. And so to help mitigate and cushion the impact and the displacement of individuals who occupy once affordable communities within the inner cities or urban areas, local governments and other municipalities can do a couple of things. Luckily, at the federal level, the Fair Housing Act was passed in the 1990s, and that essentially, according to the HUD website, did the following. The Fair Housing Act protects people from discrimination when they are renting, buying, or securing financing for any housing. The prohibitions specifically cover discrimination because of race, color, national origin, religion, sex, and disability, and the presence of children. It protects them from that redlining situation. Conditional development zones. These are zones that specifically control the municipality, the local government, specifically controls what type of development can occur and where it can occur. This can even happen at the micro neighborhood level. Expansion zones. Those are zones the government promotes development in and in certain areas by doing things like waiving permit fees and offering tax subsidies. And then affordable housing. That is a very common mitigation technique for local governments, and it's essentially the attempt to preserve a certain number of affordable housing units in an appropriate manner so that the demand for affordable housing can be met because the local government has been protecting or sometimes even developing affordable housing or setting them aside for this reason. Affordable housing can be funded through housing trust funds, or they can do things like inclusionary zoning. And this is where an area has been designated where affordable housing must be developed if any new types of development are to take place. Other things are split rate taxes and tax relief. It's just what it sounds. Essentially, waiving certain property tax burdens for those who would be considered low income. So to conclude, this is an issue that has been happening for many decades, especially in the United States. Many of us probably have firsthand experience dealing with some type of gentrification or are certainly aware of the topic. And it's an ethical issue. It's really the market forces doing their work, supply and demand shifting over time, where people want to live, where the jobs are. However, when you get down to the redlining and the tenant neglect and abuse, that's when ethics kicks in. There's a right way and a wrong way to handle gentrification, and we need to be aware of these issues and ways that we can help mitigate the side effects, the negative side effects of gentrification, and be responsible in how we as communities and individuals handle this transition. Here are my sources, and thank you very much.